Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and here we're looking at a case where if what the doctor said during trial was true, he never would have been prosecuted. I get the feeling that it was his lawyer that was a lot smarter than he was. So we're looking at a case of Osteopath James Unosawa of Seattle. He was convicted of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and abortion in the 1945 death of 18-year-old Beulah LeClair. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but released on $5,000 bond pending appeal. He got the manslaughter conviction overturned on the grounds that prosecutors had not disproved his defense that he had been trying to save Beulah's life. So, Unosawa had been born in Japan in 1891. His name was Makoto, but evidently when this osteopathic surgeon came to the United States as an adult, he adopted the Western name James, and that's the name that's on all of his documents. If Makoto is on anything, they treat it as a middle name. He had a wife and 3 daughters, and they all also had a Western name and a Japanese name. Now, he was a productive member of society. He was a doctor. He registered for the draft, but the poor guy was Japanese, so he and his family all got rounded up from Seattle, where they lived, and sent to an internment camp in Idaho. Now, Dr. Unosawa was released to live in Idaho on June 28th of 1944 and permitted to work there. He returned to Washington in May of 1945, and his wife and daughters were finally released to return to their home on July 24th of 1945. So, I have to admit, the guy got screwed over with that, but he kind of made up for it. And if you follow the link below to the blog post about what happened to Beulah, you'll see that there was a lot of racism in the news coverage, particularly the headlines. Now, Beulah Elmira LeClair was actually biracial white Native American woman, 18 years old. Some of the news coverage calls her an Indian. Again, the racism of the time. She lived in Shelton, Washington, and she was healthy and able to help her 33-year-old sister, Louise Adams, care for her children and keep house. Now, on November 13th of 1945, Beulah contacted a Filipino man named Leo Mayo. He was related by marriage to her sister in a way I haven't been able to figure out yet. She told him she was 5 months pregnant and, quote, wanted to get rid of the baby. Mayo took Beulah along with her sister Louise to Seattle, and they set about arranging the abortion. Mayo contacted a Filipino nurse named Francisca Guardia, who worked at Providence Hospital. She, in turn, is the one who contacted Unosawa. She'd known him for about 15 years, and they scheduled the abortion. So on November 29th, Guardia went to pick up Beulah and her sister. Now, apparently, Beulah and her sister gave Mayo the $250 abortion fee, which is getting pretty close to $4,000 in 2022 dollars. He handed over the abortion fee to Guardia, and she took the 2 women to Unosawa and paid him $150 and later returned the remaining $100 to Mayo. So evidently that was his kickback or finder's fee or whatever you want to call it. So Guardia took Beulah into the exam room while Louise stayed in the waiting room. And Guardia and Unosawa examined Beulah and were able to detect the fetal heartbeat with a stethoscope. Here's where it's weird. It said that Unosawa packed her vagina with something supposedly intended to prevent a miscarriage. I think that this is something that Unosawa's lawyer concocted when they went to appeal. The women returned to Unosawa's office on Saturday, December 1st at around 9:30 in the morning. And again, Louise waited while Unosawa took Beulah into the exam room. Louise testified that prior to the second visit, Beulah had been in good health. But Guardia and Unosawa, on the other hand, said that at the time of the second visit, she was pale, nervous, and reporting that she had deliberately fallen in order to cause a miscarriage. Again, this is something where what reason does Louise have to lie about her sister being in good health prior to this visit? If I had a trial transcript, I could tell whether there were other witnesses who saw Beulah out and about. Louise said they went to a show that evening, which would indicate that Beulah was feeling just fine. Whereas the defense for Gaudia and Unosawa would want to say she was already sick when she showed up. She was in the process of having a miscarriage. We were just treating her. Unosawa said he removed the packing and found extensive hemorrhage. He said he was unable to detect the fetal heartbeat, so he concluded that the baby had died and packed Beulah's vagina again, trying to stop the hemorrhage. When this didn't work, he concluded that the placenta had detached and he had to remove the dead fetus and placenta to save Beulah's life. Now, if this was the case, if Beulah had injured herself trying to bring on an abortion herself, or if she was in the process of a natural miscarriage, Unosawa would have been in the clear if he had checked her into a hospital, unless he was a reputed abortionist, which he might have been. That might have been why Gaudia was bringing women to him. But at any rate, Unosawa said he dismembered the fetus in utero and removed as much of it and the placenta as he could, assisted by Gaudia. And when he was finished, he put Beulah to bed in an adjoining room. At around 6:30 that evening, Unosawa, his wife, and Louise helped Beulah down the back steps and into Unosawa's car. And he drove Beulah and Louise back to their hotel. At around 11 o'clock that night, he drove Gaudia to the hotel to check on her. She went inside to take Beulah's temperature, which was 99 degrees. About 12 hours later, Gaudia and Unosawa returned to the hotel together to check on Beulah. They found her ill with 103-degree fever, and somebody called an ambulance to take Beulah to Providence Hospital, which that puts them way ahead of a lot of safe and legal abortion doctors I've seen, where sick women have been put in wheelchairs and shoved out the door to die, or they've refused to call an ambulance, or just dragged their asses. Once they saw that Beulah really was ill, they did the right thing and transferred her to a hospital. They should have put her in a hospital in the first place. He never would have been charged, would he? So Beulah was admitted at about 1:20 that afternoon and died about half an hour later. The next day, an autopsy was performed. And these injuries are very consistent with injuries I've seen in safe, legal abortion deaths. Part of the fetus had been left in Beulah's body and her cervix was ruptured. The autopsy physician concluded that an incomplete abortion had been performed using sponge forceps or an antiquated obstetric hook. What was left of the fetus had actually been pushed through a large tear about 2 inches by 3 inches in Beulah's uterus, and her colon was severed and torn. Her abdomen was full of blood. Again, very consistent with any botched second trimester abortion. I've seen these in legal cases and illegal cases. And again, Unosawa could have covered his ass by checking her into the hospital in the first place. So a few days after Beulah's death, police questioned Unosawa at the station, and he gave a statement but didn't say that Beulah had done anything to try to bring on an abortion. However, on Christmas Eve, a messenger delivered an azalea plant to Police Captain Mahoney, along with an envelope containing $200 in $20 bills, and a note saying, "Dear Mr. Mahoney, I would be very much thankful to you if you kindly fix up my case helping my attorney, Mr. Shermer. I'll see you again when the case is over. Thank you in advance for your favor. Most respectfully yours, Dr. James M. Unosawa." Mahoney immediately called the prosecutor and the chief of detectives. Unosawa and his lawyer were called to the prosecutor's office a few days later, whereupon Unosawa said he had merely been giving Mahoney a Christmas gift, not a bribe, and the money was given back to him. So Unosawa was arrested for manslaughter, second-degree murder, and abortion on December 11, 1945. In March, shortly before the case was set to go to trial, Gaudia went to Leo Mayo, remember the woman who'd referred Beulah, with $75 and a typed dialogue reading, Why the girl come over see you? Answer, She took medicine all the time, fell down many times, tried to get rid of the baby inside. Lately, she started to bleed more and getting weaker. This made her scare and worry, so she came over to me to help her take over to a doctor. Question, why did you go to Mrs. Gaudia? Answer, she is my friend and a good nurse, so she might help me getting a doctor. About the money, the girl asked me, so I gave to her. Her physical conditions, very thin, pale, and weak, anemic, cannot do any hard work, always complained sick. After she became family way, she got weaker and weaker. Unosawa later said that the money and the typed Q&A were a good faith expression of his understanding of the situation and his belief that Mayo saw the whole incident the same way. So, like I said, in the end, Unosawa was found guilty of all charges and sentenced up to 20 years in prison. And authorities promptly charged Gaudia with those same charges for the death of both the mother and the unborn baby. And again, it's difficult to understand how Unosawa could have asserted that he'd been trying to save Beulah's life, because if indeed he was just treating her for an in utero fetal death, he would have admitted her to a hospital rather than attempt this risky procedure in his office. Nevertheless, he won his freedom and went on to perform a fatal abortion on Martha Allett in 1954.